just in, the matter of Paul Buchanan, the defeated PNP candidate in West Central St. Andrew on September 3 against Andrew Holness. He challenged it at in the system at the constituted authority and lost, and he took it to the higher court, and the higher court has now ruled that Mr. Buchanan's request has failed. Yes, I see here the court finds that the threshold test has not been surmounted. The grounds before the court do not demonstrate past the test of arguability based on the foregoing. The orders sought in the notice of application filed on October 8, 2025 are refused. No order as to costs. So Paul Buchanan's effort to have the elections void in West Central St. Andrew, that effort has failed, as it did at the constituted authority level. Okay? We'll have more on that in the world at noon.
The Supreme Court has dismissed the long-shot attempt by former PNP candidate Paul Buchanan to overturn the result of the September 3 general election in West Central St. Andrew. Buchanan was soundly beaten by Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness by more than 2,000 votes in the election. Since then, he has pursued a legal campaign seeking to bring into doubt the legitimacy of the result. But the Supreme Court ruled on Monday that he failed to meet the legal threshold to seek judicial review of the constituted authority's decision in the matter. Mahira Stewart has the details.
Justice Sonia Wint-Blair has denied Buchanan leave to proceed with his judicial review claim. The matter centered on the constituted authority's September 30 ruling that Buchanan's allegations of election day irregularities did not justify voiding the election won by Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness. Buchanan had written to the authority on September 16, submitting several affidavits which he claimed demonstrated serious breaches that compromised the fairness of the election. He asked the body to approach the election court under Section 52A of the Representation of the People Act. But the authority found that the affidavits lacked crucial detail and failed to establish that the election was conducted so badly as to substantially distort or subvert the process of a free and fair election as required by Section 37E of the Election Petition Act. Buchanan's legal team argued that he had provided abundant evidence of irregularities and that the authority acted unreasonably. They maintained that even a single serious irregularity could void an election. But the authority's attorneys said Parliament had granted the body clear discretion to determine whether a request should be pursued. They pointed out that the affidavit evidence contained gaps and that the authority's written reasons demonstrated a careful and lawful assessment. Justice Wint-Blair agreed, ruling that the authority's decision-making process was sound and that the evidence before her did not meet, let alone surmount, the legal threshold required for judicial review. Judicial review, the judge explained, examines the process, not whether she as the judge would have reached a different conclusion. The court also held that Buchanan failed to justify why judicial review was more appropriate than an election petition, which is an alternative remedy he could have pursued within 21 days of the election result. Buchanan did not file such a petition, and the statutory time frame has now expired. Justice Wint-Blair stressed that in election matters, time is of the essence. She suggested that it was unlikely that Buchanan's argument would survive a knockout blow should judicial review be granted. She notes that there is a need for finality in electoral matters. According to the justice, this protects the legitimacy, integrity, and certainty of resolutions concerning electoral disputes. The judge concluded that the case had no realistic prospect of success and therefore refused leave for judicial review. She made no order as to costs. Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
There's no case law in Jamaica that gives the Accompong Maroons the right of sovereignty that would empower its colonel to reject the government's offer to deploy the JDF to assist with rebuilding efforts in the area after Hurricane Melissa. That's according to attorney-at-law King's Counsel Pierre Rogers, who was speaking on Nationwide this morning on Monday.
If it were not an offer, but a governmental move, I don't think he would be in a position to reject it. And the reason for that is quite simple. The Maroons are, to my mind, have been accorded a certain degree of self-determination and local government. But our case law is clear. The law in Jamaica is clear. At this point in time, no judicial authority has moved to give them or declare them to have the rights of sovereignty, which would entitle them to make a rejection as a matter of right.
The comment by KC Rogers follows a statement by Accompong Maroon Colonel Richard Curry on the weekend that he's rejecting the offer, saying it would be a militarization of the area during the recovery effort. Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness had committed to deploying JDF personnel to include engineers to assist affected residents with the re-roofing of houses damaged by Hurricane Melissa. This after a meeting with Curry on November 30 in Accompong. But days after the meeting, the Accompong colonel has said the Maroons Council has decided to continue its recovery response, utilizing only civilian resources from adjoining communities along with partners both locally and internationally. Approximately 80% of these structures in the community, which has about 260 houses, were damaged or destroyed during the October 28 hurricane. Meanwhile, Rogers says the use of the term militarization by the colonel carries a negative connotation.
The use of the term militarization is pregnant with negative connotation. I don't believe for a moment that it was misused, and I think the chief used the word because he wanted to communicate a particular position. I kind of find it ironic because the truth is the Maroons, to one extent or another, have all benefited from the infrastructural works that are in Jamaica. The military is one of them. The engineers regiment has come to our rescue on several occasions, and the facility has been offered to them now. I find it curious that you would be willing to benefit from everything else, that is to say the material, because that's what he said in his release, but is relying on notion, I believe, of sovereignty to reject the presence of the military.
King's Counsel Pierre Rogers.
It's very important that this summit is held on the African continent. It shows that Africa is taking its place in the global economy and the importance of Africa to the future of the global economy. Of course, the backdrop of Johannesburg, beautiful city, does add a certain value to the meeting. And I am particularly impressed with Johannesburg, my second time here. And the arrangements have been excellent, and the people have been warm and welcoming, and I give my commendations to President Ramaphosa and his team.
Fantastic, Prime Minister, and obviously quite a number of issues being discussed, but for a number of countries, the issue of climate change, we saw in your country with Hurricane Melissa, I would imagine it's a very critical issue. I think the UN Secretary General calls it an existential crisis where a number of countries must act together to address this particular issue.
Well, again, I give thanks to President Ramaphosa for ensuring that the issues surrounding climate and climate justice are brought to this forum, which normally has been more economistic in its outlook. But the truth is that there is no economy without consideration of the climate, as Jamaica is now experiencing. In other words, climate has a significant impact on economies, and in particular, small island developing states and less developed economies. The issue for countries like Jamaica is resilience. Now, the climate change arguments are being challenged all over. There are persons who say that the climate is always changing, that it's not a man-made, it's natural. Whatever those academic arguments are, the truth is that we are having an impact by virtue of weather events, which are more frequent, more intense and overlapping. And they are having significant impact on our economy and society. So for us, we are not countries like Jamaica. We are not in the academic or scientific or geopolitical debates about climate. For us, it's a reality. And I believe that the bridge between the differing views on climate is resilience. The ability of an economy, a society, a country to recover from a shock and recover stronger than before, and to be prepared for shocks. So an important part of the discussions here was about building resilience in the global economy, but particularly in building resilience for small island developing states that are exposed to these weather events that are more frequent, more intense, and more destructive.